Breaking the cycle to step forward. Authentic conversations from lived experience and a professional perspective in overcoming abuse with Chris Tuck and Beverley Ann.
Hi everyone, and welcome to Breaking the Cycle to Step Forward podcast with myself, Chris Tuck, and...
Hello, I'm Beverley Ann.
And we have two wonderful guests today, but we're starting with the lovely Dr. Elly Hanson. So welcome, Elly.
Thank you. It's a joy to be here again for my second appearance on this fantastic podcast. So it's lovely to be back. Thank you for inviting me again.
Well, welcome. And we are going to be joined, hopefully, tech allowing. We're going to be joined by Kath from The Family Secret. So today's podcast subject is sibling sexual abuse, and it's quite good timing really, because there was an article that came out literally 2 days ago that says that children are now the biggest perpetrators of sexual abuse against other children. And I'm very hesitant to use that word perpetrator, and we'll go through that in a little bit. But it says police data shows 52% of alleged offenders in England and Wales are minors, a situation exacerbated by I can't get my teeth out today, accessibility of violent porn. So we know, Elly, you're the expert in this kind of field and this sector. What does that say to you, and how does that lead into your research that you've done?
Thank you, Chris. I mean, sadly, these stats are not shocking. Sadly, this is what many of us have been expecting and predicting. We saw the surge in accessibility to online porn. How it's so accessible for young people. We know the content of that and the very harmful messages that it's promoting about sex and how children and indeed adults should approach sex. We have the research showing that pornography does increase sexual abuse from one young person to another. So, in a way, what did we expect? Kind of 1 + 1 is 2.
Mm-hmm.
We've been so slow to regulate online porn. And every year that has gone by where the government hasn't regulated has been thousands upon thousands more children exposed to it. And it's not saying that every child that's exposed to it is going to go on to harm, but those that may be dealing with other vulnerabilities may already be developing kind of, say, an identity of hostile masculinity, for example. It's just fueling and interacting with those vulnerabilities to push some young people into that behaviour. So sadly, this is exactly what we predict. I think in that same article, it was something like this kind of abuse, child to child, has increased 4-fold.
Right.
So it's kind of a wake-up call in a nutshell. It's a wake-up call. And we do have the Online Safety Act now, so action is going to be taken, but really the message is this needs to happen. It needs to happen yesterday. We need to be with it straight away.
Can I ask some questions to just clarify a little bit about what we mean about online pornography? Because again, for our listeners, there's different interpretations, because this is not a new thing. So are we including in that gaming?
I'm not including gaming unless there is pornography within the game. So that is true that within some games there would be very sexual content. I mean, in a nutshell, how I would define porn is kind of overt graphic sexual acts being shown. Within that, you then can be seeing some very violent stuff. Something like, I might get this stat not quite right, but it's something like 40% of online mainstream porn, a big piece of research, content analysis showed contains some kind of violence towards women. And linking back to our theme of sibling sexual abuse, sadly now, in inverted commas, incest porn is mainstream and has really ramped up in content. And that includes an awful lot of that is depicting brother-sister relationships and basically giving off the impression that that is sex, that the kind of taboo is sexy and should be transgressed.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying.
I have a quote from a porn actor who's saying she's constantly asked to act out these scenes, and she's now saying no to it because she's really concerned of a young boy watching it and thinking he's going to act it out with his sister. And she's absolutely right, but sadly, despite her decision, there's still an awful lot of it out there.
And it's also the overt messaging. Sorry, Chris. Sorry. It's the overt messaging that comes through as well. When we see that in music, let's be frank, with some of the videos and some of the wording. So whilst it's not classified as pornography, it's subliminal, isn't it?
I think that is such a good point, that I'm all for us naming the problem with porn, but like you're saying, let's not forget that other content that is still pushing objectification of girls and women, and these really unhealthy messages about sex and sex involving, for example, dominance and submission rather than equality, and that it's sexy to kind of coerce somebody or pressure someone into sex. These kind of really toxic messages that are so conducive to abuse.
But it's the normalization of this porn. I'm talking about adult porn now, that has led to a culture of where it's just acceptable to so many people. They don't even bat an eyelid to it. It's just like, oh, well, it's almost like a coming of age thing for young boys to be able to access and watch porn. And what damage could that potentially or even possibly cause? There is a lot of ignorance in inverted commas about how this is damaging and how it has changed our culture, and how most of us will, unless you're a victim of sexual abuse, there's sort of like, well, it's just porn, isn't it? That's what it is. It's just sex. So what's that got to do with childhood sexual abuse? Where's the link?
I could not agree with you more, that there is this really kind of laissez-faire attitude, and it's just it's someone's private matter, behind closed doors, boys will be boys, it's just fantasy. We hear all of that stuff, and if you do take it seriously, well, you're a bit old-fashioned and you're a prude, rather than actually let's really look at what's going on, which is that this isn't just sex and nudity.
Mm-hmm.
It is certain sexual scripts. It's a certain model of how sex should be, which involves seeing the other person, often kind of men seeing women as objects,
Mm-hmm.
Often violent, typically impersonal, and often involving inequality, coercion, manipulation. So it's really teaching boys and indeed adults really unhealthy sexual scripts and sexualizing abuse. Actually, it is sexualizing abuse, and it's promoting an abusive sexuality rather than giving young people the space to forge a sexuality that is rooted in respecting others, that chemistry, that connection. That is the sexuality that is healthy and that is going to protect against abusive behavior.
Now, I have started to read through your report. However, I've also haven't got to the end, and it is something you can only read in chunks to a certain extent. One of the things that stood out for me is when we talk about sexual abuse onto a child, and we talk about that familial sexual abuse is the largest proportion, we hear a lot of resistance from the general public outside of the survivor area. And when we talk about parental, such as fathers on their children, not saying that mothers don't, but it's a much smaller percentage, I was very shocked to see that sibling on sibling is higher.
Than father to daughter or father to son.
Yes.
Yes, I agree with you. I found writing this report, and just for the listeners, this is a report that I have written for the NSPCC on sibling sexual abuse, which will be out hopefully later on this year. And that is looking at the kind of, what sibling sexual abuse often involves, what contributes to it, and what we kind of need to be doing about it and how we can support people following it. And yes, Beverley, I think, doing this research for it, I found a lot of surprises myself. And like you say, it's interesting, isn't it? Because we're trying to often convey to people that parent to child abuse is more common than people think. But then you come across, wow, sibling sexual abuse is potentially even more shadowed. That is really not spoken about. And the idea that it's even more frequent than parent to child, I think will come as a surprise to many people. But yes, it seems from research that the most common form of sexual abuse within the family is older brother to younger sister.
Yeah.
And why is that, Elly? What has your research shown you, if anything?
It's hard to completely say, but some of the factors involved are that, society tends to look at sibling relationships as kind of inherently harmless. And that there might be these highs and lows, but it's all fine. And they can spend an awful lot of time together in each other's rooms, and no one's going to ask any questions about that. So there is just something about opportunity with siblings that may not be as present with other family relationships. A father has got to kind of set up a situation where he is alone with his child, and his partner isn't going to ask any questions. I mean, I'm hugely generalizing here.
Yeah.
But brother and sister could be spending hours and no one's even going to think about that. So that was one of the things that really came across in the research, that abusive siblings have much more opportunity potentially than others. And then that's reflected in what we see, that sibling sexual abuse on average, and again, we're talking a lot of averages here, but can be more long-lasting and more severe, more intrusive on average than other forms of sexual abuse, than many other forms.
Wow.
Wow. So it's more often involving, for example, penetration than father to child.
How would, and again, I'm generalizing, but how would the brother know how to abuse, and what, it might sound like a stupid question, but how would they know about how to abuse and what to do? And why would it even enter their heads with their sister? Where are they getting it from? What are the, how are they learning it? How is it happening?
Where's it coming from? Absolutely. Yeah. And again, we've got a bit of research on that. We need much more. But what's coming up is, we talked about pornography, obviously. That can be one major factor. Also, what's coming up is actually, if in the wider family there is, and this may not be intentional, but not the best of boundaries around nudity and things like that. And so, for example, if the siblings have been, if it's been normalized that they share a bed together, have baths together. I'm not talking about when very young, I'm talking about as time goes on.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of family nudity. That can be a risk factor. That what the theory is that the children are not subconsciously taking in that there is a taboo here. And so when they start to develop sexual feeling, well, that can happen at any age, but as sexual feelings grow, they may be naturally looking towards their younger sibling, because they haven't subconsciously taken in these boundaries. Those boundaries haven't been there from their parents. So that's one set of factors. But also you have other things like, sibling sexual abuse is much more likely when there's been a lack of parental affection. So, when you've got a kind of emotional neglect in the background. And so siblings may be kind of turning towards one another, or one sibling is looking to kind of meet that need for attention from the other. sometimes also parental favoritism, and that can work in both directions. So sometimes it can be that, say, for example, it's an older brother who's abusing. If he is the favourite, then that might, and there might be some kind of patriarchal norms in the mix too. So he knows that he kind of is taking in a sense of entitlement, that he can do whatever he wants with his sister and she's not as important as he is and no one's going to believe her. But also it can work the other way around. Like if the victim is favoured and the abusive, the harming child is very resentful of that, and that the abuse is then a kind of getting some revenge. And although I've generalised here to the most common scenario of the harming child being an older brother towards a younger sister, we know that obviously every combination does happen, including girls being the harming child.
And it can be brother on brother, sister on sister, so it's not exclusive.
No, and just kind of linking to that, so I'm going on here, but just another really important point is that although in many circumstances it is clear that we have a harming child and a harmed child, there are some situations, and it's all just so complex. It's, in a way, it's one of the most complex forms of abuse, particularly for professionals to disentangle what's going on. Because there are some situations where you cannot easily say that it is abuse, one child abusing another, but there may be something happening between two siblings that is actually quite mutual, even if it's not normative. So, for example, in my research, there were various case studies, one involving these twin brothers who had a sexual relationship for 5 years when they were children, and it didn't seem to involve any particular power dynamic. It was mutual. It's quite compulsive. But I think it's really important that we name this, because survivors of that, or people who've experienced that, are often still finding huge negative impact, even if they can't say somebody was somebody was doing this to me. There's still something about that happening that's been quite traumatic for them.
There's still shame and guilt, isn't there? No matter if there was violence or a power dynamic or whatever the situation is.
Exactly.
And to back that up, Elly, Chris already knows, I actually have a statement here from somebody who very kindly has written something so that we can actually share from the voice of a survivor. And we'll also be hearing from someone later as well. So I'm just going to share this now. This is a young woman who is now herself a parent. And I'm just going to share it, and then we can speak about it afterwards. I'd like to share something deeply personal and challenging for me. I went through years of sibling abuse with my brother, which began when I was around 5 or 6 years old and continued until my early teens. It was incredibly difficult for me to speak up about this, especially considering the manipulation and aggression I faced from my sibling. When I finally mustered the courage to tell my mum about it 6 years ago, her response shocked me. She asked if he was simply experimenting, which was very disheartening. Recently, I confided in my dad, and he asked the same question. My brother, just a year older than me, created a massive taboo around this issue. There's a stark contrast in how society perceives abuse by an adult versus abuse within sibling relationships. While the trauma I faced was significant, it's often not acknowledged or understood as much as when it's from a sibling. This lack of recognition made me feel even more isolated. Over time, I fell into a 7-year cycle of self-sabotage. As I grew older, I became more aware and angrier at being continuously controlled and belittled by my sibling, even in front of our family and friends. I found solace in using drugs as a coping mechanism, but I was too afraid to confide in people, fearing they'd only see me through the lens my brother had crafted. It took me a while to understand that what I went through was inherently wrong. Speaking out about this is a way for me to address the injustice and bring attention to an issue that often goes unnoticed. The struggle to find my voice amid the trauma was immense, but I'm hoping my story can resonate with other survivors and provide them with some comfort.
Very powerful, and just huge gratitude for her for sharing that with us.
Absolutely.
Your listeners.
Absolutely.
And her hope at the end there will of course be realized that there'll be many people listening to this who have been feeling exactly the same way. Everything that she shared is something that we know many survivors of sibling abuse face, and exactly that point, that it is something that society isn't recognizing, isn't understanding, and that's contributing to the alienation and isolation that survivors are feeling. And it can be just as harmful as abuse from an adult. There's no reason why it'd be any less harmful, and yet that harm is not being acknowledged.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So thank you to the very brave person who brought that in. What highlighted for me was some of the information that was in your report as well. And, is the age of how young,
how long it went on for,
yeah,
the manipulation and coercion that she was subjected to and that continued into adulthood. And also another major theme there, which we come across a lot, sadly, is these minimizing reactions from other family members. It's really sad, but the truth is that the majority of children who disclose sexual abuse do not receive an adequately supportive response from their parents. And that is even more likely, sadly, in these situations where the harming person is the sibling.
yes,
And it's often written off as experimentation, rather than the abuse that it actually constitutes.
yeah. And anyone listening, please look after yourself, because this is a conversation that really needs to be had. However, we also understand the impact. This is something that we've all, even presenting this, we all have to look after ourselves around this. We've now got Kath in the waiting room, who's about to join us. So, Chris, as I let her in,
Yeah.
okay, I sent her a little message to say that we're going to let her in, just to give her a bit of warning. So she should be coming in any minute. Here's Kath.
Hi, Kath.
Hello, Kath. Can you hear us?
You're on mute, Kath.
Everything's turned off at the moment, so let's just see what's happening.
So while Kath's finding herself, I just wanted to go back on one thing, Ellie. And when I said, how are children learning about this? We obviously talked about porn. We talked about models, as in people they may look up to. And we're talking about as well that maybe that child who is the harmer has actually experienced abuse themselves potentially. And if there's generational abuse, there's almost a culture within a family that generational abuse does pass on in certain situations. We know not every single household, because it just doesn't, but it does in some. So I just wanted to bring that to the fore as well.
Oh, thank you for naming that, Chris. It's such an important point, and it must always be considered and explored in these situations. Has the harming child, what have their experiences been, and in any kind of response to sibling sexual abuse, we need to be looking at the safety of everybody involved. And we've also got situations, this is why it's so complex. We've also got situations where one sibling has done something sexual to another sibling, but that is being directed by an adult. Now that might be being directed by an adult within the family. It might be being directed by an adult online.
Absolutely.
And so then often the child that is doing it then is left with all of the self-blame that they have perpetrated. But actually, I actually wouldn't see, in those situations where it is being directed and coerced by an adult, I would see no, the offender there is the adult, and it needs to be looked at that. And often the child that's then being directed, coerced into, or blackmailed or whatever, they are suffering, that is abuse to them too.
They're a victim, aren't they?
They are, and that is moral injury, the abuse of moral injury.
Oh, okay.
Can I just interject to welcome Kath? Kath, you don't know me. I'm Beverley. Hello.
Hiya.
Elly's here, and I know you know the wonderful Chris.
Hi,
Yes,
Kath.
Hi.
So thank you for joining us today on today's podcast, which is the subject of sibling sexual abuse. Now, you did a documentary, and I'm not going to give anything away. I'm going to let you speak in a mo. But you went through a process called restorative justice, and we've never spoken about that at all on any of our podcasts that we've done to date. So it's entirely up to you what you share. And we are just really grateful that you're here. So thank you very much. So the platform's all yours to share what you want.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so I guess for me, sort of my journey on sort of disclosure and stuff like that came much later on in life. So the family stayed together as a unit, I suppose, until in my 30s. And then it just came to a point sort of where I couldn't not, it felt like I was living a lie. Do you know what I mean? I felt like I just didn't know whose life it was anymore. I was like, whose life is this? You know, like all these, I had a good job, a husband, a child, a house, all the things that like you want to tick off as you get older, all those things. I'd sort of ticked them all off, but there was this one secret that nobody knew. I'd not told a single soul until the day I disclosed. That was the first time I'd talked about it. And I guess sort of because my career was in youth justice and criminal justice for young people. I'd worked with a lot of sex offenders, and I'd worked with a lot of young people that had committed sexual offences. So I'd sort of, I guess in a way, I was sort of looking for answers outside of me, like externally to me, instead of looking at my life and what had happened to me and those kind of things. And I guess I sort of came to a head where it was like, but the answers aren't in anybody else. The answers aren't. I've got to look at. I can't just keep hiding it and pushing it down and pushing it down. So it just sort of came to a point where I was at a point in my life where I didn't want to be here anymore. I sort of thought, if I don't tell my family, my parents, if I don't tell them what their son is and who he is to me, because obviously everybody's offender is loved by people, and that's, I weren't trying to take any of that away. And I think in my situation, he was the older child, so he was sort of the apple of my parents' eye, and he was sort of the golden boy. And then I have another brother, and then myself, so I was the youngest. And I was sort of 7 when the abuse started, and he would have been at like 11, 12, that kind of age. And I think sort of to carry, it's a heavy burden to carry when, and it was prolonged abuse. It went on for sort of 3 years. It went on until I was about to start high school. So it was prolonged, and it was just not nice to grow up in a world. So like in my world, as a little girl growing up, everybody told me how lovely my brother was, and he'd never hurt anybody, and he's such a gentle giant. That was his sort of nickname. And I just think, that's not true. Like and so I had all this conflicting stuff, because I had this like wonderful brother through the day that everyone was telling me was amazing and kind and caring and generous and all these things. And then he was coming into my bedroom and raping me on a night, and I was like, what the heck is going on? This isn't a nice person. So it's sort of like I say, I got to sort of like in my 30s, and I thought, I don't want to die. I want to live. Why should he win in that sense, I guess, is what I thought. And that was sort of when I just got the courage and thought I need to get help, was sort of the first thing that I thought of, and obviously made some self-referrals and made sure everything was in place so that I could disclose, so everything was safe, so my little boy was going to be looked after, and everything was all right. And yeah, so I knew about restorative justice purely because of the work that I already did. Working in secure children's homes, working for the youth offending team, you know, work for the youth, that kind of stuff, like really geared me up to sort of know what was available. And I didn't plan on making a documentary and showing the world, sort of like that wasn't ever part of it. That just sort of snowballed. That was just something that I'd sort of said, I want this to be on record. Because obviously the CPS, the police, the sergeant, it didn't even get to CPS. The sergeant said, even though he went to the police station and said, yeah, it's true, I raped her, the CPS, it wouldn't have stood in court because he was under 14, so he was protected by the Ryan Capak's law. So, and there was no way to prove that because he was 30, 35 or 30. I don't know how old he was. I can't really remember, but he was, he would have been about 36, I think, at the time of disclosure. So there was no way to prove what he was thinking and whether he knew it was right or wrong or whatever, you know, nonsense that the police want to sort of say. So he was protected by the Ryan Capak's law because it happened pre-1997. So so you know, I knew I didn't have anything else. I knew I didn't have anything that would hold him accountable, even though he'd said, oh yeah, I did that. Everything that Kath said is true. I knew that what it was for me was I wanted my mum to hear it from him. I wanted her to hear that he wasn't the boy she thought he was. And that's what I got, essentially. But it didn't fix anything. It didn't heal anything. It didn't do anything that I thought, oh, I'm going to feel better after this. No, that didn't happen.
Did you feel validated, though, in getting your mum to actually hear what he'd actually done to you? Did you feel any validation or get any acknowledgement, or what did you feel?
So I think in the beginning, I knew, and the reason I didn't disclose was because I knew how much it had hurt my mum. I just knew absolutely how much it would break her heart. You know, my mum was a child protection social worker. You know, this stuff, she was absolutely devastated, absolutely heartbroken. Still is. Do you know what I mean? How do you fix something like that? You know, and I think I felt, because I just knew the devastation that it was going to cause, and I just knew that, like how I describe it is that Robert put me on a pressure plate at 7 years old, and at 32 I stepped off it and I blew my family up. I blew it all up. That's how I describe it. And but I think because of the work I'd done, you know, and sort of the career path I'd chosen, I was prepared for that. I think I wouldn't have been prepared at 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, whatever, you know, when people say, oh, why didn't you say something sooner? Because I wasn't mature enough. I didn't even know until I went to high school how wrong it was.
You don't have the language, do you?
Absolutely don't have the language. And I think that for me, that's such a victim blamey sort of finger pointing, well, you should have told someone sooner, you know, but there's no right or wrong in disclosure.
No.
And I think that's like a really important message when you want people to come forward. But I also think it's like I was devastated in response to, it's like the police's response. I was gutted about that, because I just think here we are as a society, 2024 now, but as a society telling people, come forward, tell people, talk about it, you'll feel better. Yeah, it's true, you do feel better, but the people that are doing it, nothing happens. They're not held accountable. There's no responsibility. There's no punishment. You know, like less than 3% of people that go to court for charges of sexual assault, sexual abuse, rape, all those things, less than 3% get a conviction. So, you know, that's got to change. There's got to be something where, you know, like for me, I just think, God, if someone comes forward and says, yeah, I did that, how are they protected? How is that a thing?
Absolutely. And I'm also just interested in the process that you went through with the restorative justice, and what did that involve? Because, you know, I was looking into it when I was looking into the different ways in which we can respond to sibling sexual abuse, and it seemed like it was done very differently in different places around the world, and even in different, for example, states within Australia, it seems to be done very differently. And sometimes it seemed to involve more consequences or responsibility than in other situations. And I just wondered, what your process involved and what you found helpful, and if you could have changed it to be better, to be, like you say, kind of more justice, what would you, how would you change it?
I guess the restorative justice process is it's really difficult because it's victim led in a lot of ways, but the offender's still in control. So at any point, Robert could have said, "I'm not doing this," and I would have got nothing. So, you know, fortunately for me, he was cooperative and he was willing to talk about it and he was willing to put himself out there. And obviously, it weren't just a restorative meeting between our family. We put it out there nationally. You know, it went on Channel 4 and was nominated for a BAFTA, and all those things were quite big. So for somebody to be like, "Yeah, I raped my sister" on TV, like, is you know, he could have pulled the plug at any point. And I think that's the important thing to remember with restorative justice is you're never in control. It's like it's just another thing that you get offered as a victim, but you're actually not in any kind of control. So he could have pulled the plug at any time, and that would have obviously left more unanswered questions, I suppose.
That's interesting. What it's making me think of is, for example, in one state in Australia, I think it's Queensland, they have a system, and it is for young offenders, but you know, I'm just thinking more widely, where basically there is a bit more control, that the person offending can either go down a restorative justice route or there is criminal justice. So it's less easy for them to step away, put it that way. That there's
Still a consequence if they don't do it.
Exactly. And I just wonder whether something like that might have felt better for you to know that there was he didn't just have the control to just step away. There would be some consequence.
Yeah. I think it's really it's just such a tricky one in general, because I think, like, the process itself is quite long. So I think for us it lasted about, I think it was about 8 months, something like that. So it was quite a long process. So, and in between all that, you're trying to do your healing and you're doing your therapy, and you're really trying to. For me, I was trying to rebuild my life. So you're juggling a lot, and then it brings new things up, and I think the difficulty in the situation, in my situation, I would advocate for restorative justice. I think it's a really, really good thing, because I think, and not just in personally but professionally, as you know, I would advocate restorative justice because it's impactful. You really get both sides of whereas, if you commit a crime and you go to court and you get punished, you don't really think about it again. I've worked with young people that have done it and done it and done it and done it, and they're in that sort of conveyor belt of crime, if you like. But at the minute, I don't think in England that young people can access restore. I don't think that's an option, because they're not sort of mature enough, I guess, to deal with that level. It's very intrusive, isn't it? It's very
Kath, I didn't realise you could have restorative justice if there wasn't a conviction.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, you can ask for it. And that's the other thing. So, like, because I knew about it, I said to the police, "Well, what else can you do? There's got to be something more." And obviously, I knew about restorative justice just from working for the Ministry of Justice and sort of working within youth offending. But I also think a lot of people see restorative justice as a bit fluffy and a little bit like people are getting away with it, but you're really not, because you're really, really digging deep into the reasons, but why and how did it feel, but not just for the victim, but for the offender too, because I don't necessarily think there is any answers, but there's some kind of comfort in them acknowledging the hurt that they've caused. And it's quite genuine. I don't think, for me, it felt genuine.
Yeah.
The thing is, when you're in a restorative justice process, if you've got someone in front of you saying, "Yeah, I did it," and then they're not getting convicted for it, it must feel really just, you've got the proof.
It's frustrating. Yeah, it's really frustrating. It was, and I think that was sort of a bit of pill to swallow, because you can't sort of, I don't think there's any way to describe what it feels like, but I knew that I had nothing else. I just knew, and I knew when the dollar and Capax, when that sort of defense came up, I was sort of like, yeah. And I mean, it's good now because obviously New Labour abolished it in 97. It got abolished, but that means that there's hundreds of thousands of people that are my age, potentially, that, and younger maybe, that that will protect their offender.
Yeah. And sadly, you know, Kath, my abuser was my dad and a friend, but my dad, that wasn't going further to court. I didn't get restorative justice, but I did confront him, and he acknowledged it, but he would never have gone for restorative justice because his words were, you should have kept your mouth shut. And then some horrible things. However, for me personally, I don't regret it because this anger from my toes up came out and I was able to release it. And for me, and this is for anyone listening, it's about what's right for them independently, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think, you know, there's a lot of people out there that will say restorative justice isn't good for sexual offending, and you know, it's not built for that, or, you know, whatever, however, you know, it's not a good approach or whatever. But I think if there's nothing else, and that's all you've got, then why not give it a go? And you know, you don't know. Robert could have come and done the meeting because I've not seen him since, but I'd not seen him for like I don't even know, like a year or something since, probably a bit more, and I think there was something in that, knowing that I'd done that, and I had confronted him, and I had made him face what he'd done, you know. And don't get me wrong, there were things that I said and things that he did, and I just think like he was still in control. Like, I don't think that ever changed, but it was a little bit of an ending for me, because it gave me sort of a little bit of closure in terms of, right, I've done that. It was like a little bit of something in me that could just let that go. Like, I don't want to know anything from him now. Do you know what I mean? I don't have any questions. I don't need anybody now to tell me that it were all in my head, because he's admitted it and he said, and that for me is really, really important. And I think in terms of what you were just saying, Beverley, I think it's important to do it safely, innit? And restorative justice gives you that safety, because
absolutely,
it's not just you confronting. For you, it was your dad, and that could be a dangerous situation, you know. It made that confrontation quite safe.
Put a kind of structure around it. And from what you're saying there's something so important about, here I do have a voice. I can say, you know, I can accuse you, I can hold you accountable. And then, like you say, there's something powerful about the process where they are facing what they've done and hopefully feeling anguish about that, which sometimes the criminal justice process, offenders can evade all of that emotional side of things, can't they?
I mean, I think about it once they've been sentenced. You know, they don't have to think about that poor old lady that they burgled, because it's done, and they've got a community order, or they've gone to prison, or whatever it is. They don't have to think about it ever again. Whereas it's quite personal. Restorative justice is quite personal.
Yes. And then having those people witnessing it as well, you know, whether that, like you say, be your mother. I suppose in some restorative justice, it can be kind of wider people in the community. That feels quite an important strand as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really is. And it's just, I don't really have words for it, because it's like Beverley said, it is everybody's very different, and every restorative justice meeting's very different, and I guess it's about remembering that the process is long. So how it works is the restorative justice people will come and they'll like so they met with me, and then they went and met with Robert, and it's a little bit like a game of tennis for like 6 months, 8 months. You know, so you're just batting them forward, and they don't agree with this, and they think this, and they've said this, and it's the questions, so that then when you go to the meeting, nothing is a surprise. because you're talking about what you want to talk about as a victim. So you're very much, but then you don't know what they're going to bring up. Like they could just be like, oh, surprise, here's this.
So
But
can we ask Kath, what support did you have in place at that time? Because, you know, as you said, you were trying to heal as well, but you're also having to prepare yourself to hear his side.
Yeah. So I guess I've said this a few times now, but I feel quite fortunate because of sort of the career that I had at that point in time. I had a lot of really, really good support. So I've still got a lot of friends that are like harmful sexual behaviour nurses, and I've got a lot of friends that still work in criminal justice, and I've got a lot of friends. And my manager at the time was sort of a HSB specialist, so she was sort of like really clued up on it, and work were really, really supportive. So I had sort of really good structures in place, and I'd self-referred to a specialist sexual abuse counselling in Bradford. So I was getting weekly counselling support from them, and obviously people at work was really supportive. I had occupational therapist, I had my boss obviously was like just amazing, and I had my family, like my mum, and I think for me that was like having someone believe you is that's the biggie, isn't it? That was for me, it was because that could have been the end of all of it. I would have lost everybody.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I had my family, and I had my friends, and I had my work, and I had my little boy. You know, I had a focus, I had a purpose, I had a reason to get up every day, I had a reason to get better. But I think because of the way my brain works, I was like, right, I'm going to sign up to this counselling, but I'm also going to sign up and do a counselling qualification because I want to know what they're going to do to me so that I'm prepared. So, you know, there you go. I was there doing my level 2 counselling qualification, getting counselling, working full time, having a little bit. Oh, it was mental.
You sound just like me, Kath, and probably lots of other people. We have to be in control because it's all been stripped. We're telling you how you're going to converse with us and not the other way round.
Absolutely. I want to know what tricks they're going to play. But yeah.
Can I just clarify for people, you mentioned HSB nurse. So HSB is harmful sexual behaviour nurse.
Yeah. So
just
like
wanted to clarify that. Yeah,
that's what that is. So that's sort of people that sort of work with sex offenders, basically, so that young people that commit those sorts of offences.
Now sorry, Chris, go on, because I interjected earlier.
Since the documentary, what have you done with your life? And you were saying that you're doing more work around the documentary in that vein. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you're up to?
Yeah, so since documentary, so I got my life sort of back on track and sort of, you know, big ideas, big sort of things. I did a lot of work with rape crisis over the last few years because they've got a big sibling sexual abuse project that's running. Rape crisis. I've forgotten.
Don't worry. Rape crisis, everyone knows.
Yeah. So I've done a lot of I went and did a couple of videos down in Bristol to sort of promote sibling sexual abuse, along with some other survivors of sibling sexual abuse. So we, you know, sort of having that sort of on the back burner, and I've done just stuff like that, really, just things to sort of raise awareness, because I think that the biggest message for me that I'd want people to hear is that there is life afterwards. Like there is, you know, there's always hope. Yeah, there's bad days, yeah, there's good days, but that's, you know, everybody has that, whether they've had trauma or not. And I think it's sort of getting a grips to and allowing yourself to just have a bad day. Like I was terrible for not allowing myself to have a bad day, and 50,000 distractions, and, you know, playing every sport under the sun, and
keeping busy.
Keeping busy is the key to life. But yeah, so we did a lot of work, a lot sort of going on behind the scenes, because I know that there's still a really big team as part of the I can't remember can't remember. It's sort of like it's the west, so it's like Bristol and places like that. They're doing there's a lot going on in the background really about sibling sexual abuse, and sort of like training people and doing specialist courses for social workers and teachers and stuff like that. Where, because obviously sibling sexual abuse is the biggest form of childhood abuse, and it's the one that's the most damaging, that's the most under the radar, that people don't want to either admit or want to talk about really. And I think, and because it's so hidden, then people don't come forward.
Absolutely.
So at the start of the programme, Dr. Elly was saying about her research that she's been conducting in this area, sibling sexual abuse, and she basically said everything that you've just said. Elly, is there anything else you want to add to what Kath said, or
I just think, like you say, Chris, there's so much synergy with what we're sharing, and yeah, just really echoing what you're saying there, Kath, that it's still so under talked about. And so I think, like you say, a lot of survivors are often thinking, well, am I an official survivor of sexual abuse because it was from another child, or it was from my sibling? And there's all of those questions, isn't there, for many people? Or, you know, am I to blame? We obviously know that survivors of all kinds of sexual abuse are feeling that. And it can be like when it's from a sibling, there can be that particular, you know, well, we're both children, so is it my fault, can be a factor, can't it? And so no, I suppose just one question I had was whether, like, looking back on when it happened, and whether there would be anything that you would say, that if the system around you had been different, could that have helped in any way? Like, was there anything that you would have wanted back then that might have helped you while it was going on?
Yeah, I think the what ifs are like they're the bane of your life, because you can always look back and think, oh well, what if, you know, for me, I always look back and I think, what if I hadn't have begged my mum to let me sleep at my granddad's that night, because that's when it started. And I just think, why did I want to? But I was just curious. I mean, I just wanted to know what was so good about that house. Now I wish I'd have never wanted to know. But I think in terms of like the support network and things like that, I think for me, it was really difficult because so I went to a little village school. So there was 22 kids in the whole school. 22, that was it. It was 6 kids in my class. That was it. It was tiny little school, and it closed down. It lost the money. And obviously they can't. There's no justification in 22 kids, you know. So at the point of when Robert started raping me, I changed schools at the same time. So any behaviour that would have been displayed was missed, because it was picked up as, well, she's just moved from a school of 22 kids in the whole school to a class of 34. There was 34 kids in my new class. So that move in itself, and then the abuse on top, would have all been categorized as one thing.
Yeah.
There was like an assumption made, rather than maybe like that kind of curiosity, like what could there be anything else going on?
Yeah. So I think like for me that it's, and I just think it's just keep the conversations open, like for, you know, when with kids, you know, and listen and look for things and look for signs. And, you know, nobody's saying everybody's gonna, every family, it happens in every family, nobody's saying that, but unfortunately there's potential in every family, isn't there, if there's more than one sibling, and or there's cousins, or there's, you know, whatever families, or blended families now even, you know. It's just be mindful, I guess, of sharing bedrooms and walking around naked and all those things that, like, probably back in the 80s and the 90s were all right. Now we've sort of learned, actually, no, that's not all right. And I think it's just being mindful of that. And but obviously talking to boys and girls, and education is the, you know, it's the, you know, people talk about kids shouldn't be sexualized and they shouldn't be brought into sort of this adult perspective, but you've got to offer some protection, haven't you? And
Absolutely.
I guess, like, I can remember being in year 7 and being in science and learning that what he'd done to me was really, really wrong, because I had no idea, and I had no idea until then.
Yeah.
No, not a Scooby. So there I was sat inside, and I can remember crying, absolutely crying my eyes out, absolutely sobbing. And the teachers couldn't, obviously I weren't going to tell anybody. And then I can remember getting close to disclosing to a teacher. And then you sort of like snap back into real life, and I was like, oh no, I can't tell her. And then I just looked at her and I went, oh, do you know what it is? I just really don't like maths, because she was my maths teacher. And they just took it. School just took it. They didn't do anything else. They didn't ask any more questions. They didn't ring home. They didn't do anything, really.
Wow.
Like you say, rather than that kind of ongoing, keeping the door open so that children know that they can come back, continue the conversation. It's going to be a process, isn't it? You know, and it feels like, Catherine, what you've said there, there's so many things that if we could do all of those things, we'd be in a much better place, wouldn't we, to prevent it and to help children who are currently experiencing it.
Yeah, and I think it's that whole feeling of not being alone. You know, there's a whole community of people. Like, I just thought it was just me for so long, and obviously working within the criminal justice sort of sector opened my eyes to the fact that, you know, it's not just boys doing it to girls, it's boys doing it to boys, and girls doing it to boys, and girls doing it to girls. And, you know, it's across the board, really. There's no sort of strict marker of who can do it, but what it does feel like is every story I hear and every survivor that I talk to and everybody that's had some form of childhood abuse, it's as if the abuser's got some kind of manual. So it's as if these people read these books and they go, it's your fault, you need to keep it a secret, nobody will believe you anyway. Like, it's like, who learns that? Like, where? That abusers uses those, and it's like, what the heck? What?
Absolutely.
It's some kind of manual that us normal people don't know about.
We don't know about it, yeah.
No. So sadly, I am the timekeeper. The hour has just flown, and I can't thank you enough, Kath, first of all, for coming on, and also Elly again. But what we also like to do is have a last thought. So I'll give you time to think about that. I'm going to come to you, Chris, and put you on the spot. Any last thoughts for yourself from what we've heard today?
As a survivor and knowing what I know, I still get shocked by listening to experts and other survivors about the different types of abuse, the taboos and the silence around it all, and how much more work we've got to do, basically. That's my last thoughts.
Absolutely. Elly, any last thought for yourself?
I think picking up the baton there from Chris, it's sobering, I think, and how much more work I am left with, what Kath shared, the other survivor who you read out her account, sitting with what you've been through and the knowledge that children are going through this now. And I'm going to hold a hand of hope as well, that it is really encouraging that we're able to have these conversations today, that Kath did have something of a restorative justice process, that is kind of going on, that there are this training for social work, as you mentioned. It feels like we're at a moment in time where we can hold some quiet hope that maybe change is afoot.
Mm-hmm.
Now I've given you time to reflect, Kath. I've not just landed on you. What would be your final words from today, from yourself?
I think my final thoughts are just that obviously we've just had this like crazy, like last 4 years have been crazy, haven't they, just with COVID and the pandemic. And I just think how much more abuse has happened when all those children and all those kids had to be at home. So they were home with the that was abusing them. They were at home with them. And there was no outlet. There was no school for 7 hours. There was no after school club. There was no school dinner. Do you know what I mean? And I just think, what have we got to unpick in the future? What damage that's done psychologically to this generation of children, and what are we going to do about it? Because look, I've just found out that assessments for ADHD are going to be taking up to 14 years in the future, and I just think, wow, so something needs to happen now, really, in terms of looking at historical abuse and what can we do. So that'd be sort of my final thought, I guess.
Thank you. Well, my final thoughts. First of all, Kath, thank you so much for coming on and literally coming in without any introduction at first. So thank you for that. I know we messaged you privately, but thank you, because that takes a huge amount of courage and sharing your thoughts. Elly, thank you for coming back again. Chris, you said it so well. You know, doesn't matter how much of a survivor we are with our own experiences and the work that we all do, you know, nothing is surprising. But I would like to also think, you know, that we can offer support to the whole of the family, including your parents, because there's a scenario and you've got another sibling as well. So we need to be really mindful of that. Anyone listening, if you're looking for support, Kath has also mentioned about rape crisis. Kath, is there a particular charity that you would like to direct people towards if they've been if they're a survivor or victim of child sexual abuse or sibling sexual abuse?
Yeah, I mean, the national helpline, you know, there's people there, obviously locally for me, would be like Sarsville, you know, survival after rape in Leeds. But I guess there's not really one particular one, but yeah, just if you need to talk to somebody, don't hold it in. So yeah, just ring the rape crisis, the national number or your local number.
Yeah. Elly?
Yeah, that sounds, and I just adding on to that, maybe NAPAC as well, that I know have recently done a bit of work around sibling sexual abuse. So their helpline workers may also be good people to seek support from.
Yeah. Thank
Before
you.
we close, Bev, can I just ask Kath? I've tried to search for your Channel 4 documentary, but I can't find it.
Yeah, it's so Channel 4 take them off after so long. And you'd have to get it from sort of the film people. I mean, I can email them and try and get a link for you.
Just
That would
because
be
I think so many people would really benefit from hearing your story, basically. I really do feel that. You must be freezing. What are you doing?
Oh, gardening. I'm just sorting a garden out.
All right, we'll let you go and we'll let everybody go. And we just want to make sure everybody take care of yourself. Hopefully you've learned something from today's podcast. And if you do have any questions or want to make any comments, please get in contact with us. Bev, where?
Breaking the Cycle 2stepforward@gmail.com, and there'll be a link underneath either the video if you're watching this or the audio podcast that you're listening to. So we thank you so much and thank you for listening.
Bye everyone.